After competing in Crow's Nest, I'm ready to showcase to you guys my top 16 Gandeeva deck profile for the Crow's Nest event. What is up, card fighters, and welcome back to the Prime Vanguard channel. I am super excited to showcase to you guys the deck that I made it the top 16 with Gandeeva. Now, Gandeeva is one of the most popular and powerful decks currently in the overdress format, and I have my own variation. I have a couple of twists and tricks to it to make it, work the way I wanted it to. Now, I really did enjoy playing at the Crow's Nest event. I really do want to give my respects and shout out to both all the sponsors of the event. I believe it's Kingslayer Car as well as Antonio, aka Crow, who I am very happy with that I play with at my local Georgia's event, and I'm grateful for all of the support that he's personally given to me and the fact that he's able to host these events. I also want to say thank you to all the people that I competed with at this event. I'm so grateful for you guys, and you guys made me a better player every single time we get to card fight against each other and help me grow as an individual as well. But enough of the sentimental nonsense. I know what you guys are here for. Let's go ahead and head over to camera 2 and check out my Gandeeva deck profile. Alright, you guys, to get this deck profile started off with, I am playing one copy of Steel Blaze Dragon Arinsa, newcomer, and I'm switching to Diapernal and Gandeeva for the star of the show. Now, this ride line is a split between the Bobsagrava ride line as well as the Gandeeva ride line, but why am I playing it like this? Now, newcomer searches out a Steel Blaze weapon, which does nothing for this deck. However, it does the same thing as the grade 1 in my opinion, which essentially gives you the free ride up because of no rear guards. I think that taking a card out from your deck and using up a soul is perfectly fine. You only use soul for your grade 3 card, lets you extend your Gandeeva plays to increase your bind anyway. So as far as my opinion goes, getting this extra card to your hand and deck thinning out by 1 is extremely important because you want to hit triggers with Gandeeva, especially with how fast everything else is going to be. I don't see the purpose in playing the grade 2 Bobsagrava card. I think that's a little much. You're going to recycle this card out for 2 turns to make sure that you can ride up a set to Gandeeva for free. That's not needed in my opinion. You go first, you get this card, you save it for this, and then you discard something else. That's perfectly fine in my opinion. It's not that big a deal. I prefer the fact that this gets you play your Vanguard for free because then I can use my CB for like one of my other extenders for Gandeeva, and it just makes more sense to me. Especially if you go second, you get the extra card draw, which will make up for you using it on the card advantage anyway. Next up, I play 3 copies of the man, the myth, the legend, 3 copies of Scarlet Flame, Marshal, Dragon, Gandeeva. Persona riding is insane, especially in this deck. The late game push as well as the control aspect is what made Gandeeva and the critical bonus like one of the best decks in the format. I do think that Gandeeva, in terms of Willista, I think that Willista is honestly better than Gandeeva by just a little bit, only because the deck has such insane card advantage, and it does that naturally versus this deck needing the next card I'm going to showcase in the profile. I do think that the control aspect is something that a lot of decks cannot handle, as well as the late game power up push. This is a snowball deck, so the longer the game goes on, the more cards you acquire in your bind zone, you can hit very powerful magic numbers. And because our numbers are, additional 2,000, we hit those odd numbers against our opponent, especially in overdress. That means that those numbers become a lot scarier for the opponent to have to deal with. The late game power push with this card as well as the control aspect make it very impossible for a lot of other decks to play past it, as well as support that we have around it. For my next grade 3, I play 4 copies of Scarlet Flamebow General Sturgna. Now Sturgna, this is the only Gandeeva extender that we have that lets you bind 2 cards to accelerate your bind zone to meet the threshold for Gandeeva's effect. This card with Gandeeva will give you 3 cards in the bind zone. Your other extenders should push you to 5 naturally speaking, as well as the simple fact that it's one of the other power up cards you have in the deck. It's the fastest extender for Gandeeva, and because it is a 13k base, it'll easily hit for magic numbers against your opponent. And finally, for the most important card in the deck, hands down, we have 3 copies of Best Harvest. This card is what allows Gandeeva the insane amount of draw power that the deck has. Playing Best Harvest and being able to retire normally 3 to 4 rear guards means that on top of the effects of your units that retire stuff, all of their effects are live, and when you stop retiring, you get back all the card advantage you lost from playing the cards onto the board. Best Harvest hands down is the reason why this deck is one of the top tier decks, because of the insane card advantage that it gets, and lets keep up with powerful decks like Willista. But 3 is fine. I feel like when I tried 4, it got clunky, and I ended up having to discard 1 anyway as I was writing up. And in certain matchups, well, very few now, this card will be dead. Moving on to grade 2s, I play probably the second most important card in the deck, which is 4 copies of Drag Rider Alpha Car. This is how you set up your bind when going second or when later in the game on your Persona Ride turns or push turns. This card puts itself into the bind zone to give you an additional 4 to 5 attacks. When you set up your 4 or 5 attack play, you're adding 2 cards into your bind zone, which essentially is another 4,000 power to your front row prior to other card effects that will make your attacks a lot stronger. On top of the critical pressure with Gandeeva and the control aspect, this gives the deck the additional push it needs for it to be relevant against all of the other decks, especially considering the fact that every deck right now is doing about 4 to 5 attacks, and Gandeeva just has the critical bonus on it without Alpha Car for the 3 attacks and the additional power up. This gives the deck really that sort of like winning image that it needs to push and be better than every other deck it faces against. For my next grade 2, I am playing 4 copies of Blast Artillery Dragon Brachio Force. Now, Gandeeva does not have an early game, and when you're going second and your opponent is going to take that turn to try and beat you before you get to Gandeeva, this card gives you something to push back with. A lot of people will expel cards from their hand to block this because you're going to retire their rear guards early, and it also lets you get some of the cards back to your hand from playing this card. It gives you an early game and it lets you like actually defend yourself and play against it instead of just swinging with Vanguard against their 3 rear guards. It gives you the chance to fight back in the early game, which is where Gandeeva is weak at. For my last grade 2, I am playing 2 copies of Scarlet Flamebow General Rugent. This is a pure Gandeeva extender. You drop it, you retire something, you bind something, and then under certain circumstances you get to draw a card to replace it. 3 Dragon Empire PGs, 1 copy Elementaria. 3 Scarlet Flamebow Soldier Bosun. This card will give you the counter charge in the deck. It also binds itself. So this combined with your Alpha card can essentially clear your columns to make sure that you're giving yourself a fresh column if you use double Alpha card play, or at least become a really good support card when combined with the effect of your Vanguard to, you know, reach the 5 bind threshold to get the effect off for Gandeeva's skill. For my last grade 1, I played 1 copy of Crimson Scale Sword Maestro Bernaya. This card is a pure self-replacement. You drop it, you bind something, which itself, and then you get to draw a card. It's a nice little bonus to the deck. I think that having one of it's fine. Its other piece lets you actually draw as a plus outside of like the effects of your Gandeeva support cards that just draw by replacing themselves. Yeah, being a booster that happens at the end of the battle means that you can also use this card to swing for full power against other attacks. This is another card you can also drop in the early game, and if you get off the Brachio Force, it'll actually allow itself to bind it and draw another card. So you can essentially get back the cards that you used to place this card. Only 1 because I think that having more grade 2s and 3s in the deck is important because you definitely want to make sure that you're hitting for full power columns against the opponent. And for my trigger lineup has actually changed for this deck despite you guys not seeing it. I am playing 7 critical, the Dragon Empire over trigger. I am playing 4 draw triggers, and then I am playing 4 heal triggers. Okay, so here's the thing about why I'm playing 4 draw triggers. Everybody knows how to beat Gandeeva. They know that it's weak in the early game, and without Best Harvest, this deck does not recuperate a lot of card advantage outside of my other effects that I already showcased. So playing 4 draw triggers means that in the early game, if you do have to get beat up, I'd rather get beat up drawing cards than just giving power to an empty front row. And because Gandeeva does require a lot of power, and the way that I personally approach the deck, I do like to hold on to my Persona Ride when it is needed. I've never had an issue with like making sure that my numbers were solid. Your bind zone naturally just will get bigger over time, especially when your opponent starts dropping rear guards on board. So it's not an issue that you really have to deal with. Your card advantage, at least card advantage to me, is more important in this deck because you have to draw into certain pieces for this deck to work. When you go first, you need to have this, you need to have this, and you need to make sure that you have this in some circumstances. You need to make sure that you have like Bernaya or Bosun to get that 5th card in the bind zone to push. Like, this deck is very piece reliant and needs to see a lot of things, especially going first when your opponent is not going to drop those rear guards onto the board, and you want to make sure that you're easily able to set up 5 to 6 cards in your bind zone right away to make sure that Gandeeva is pushing as hard as it possibly can, as soon as it possibly can. But this is my current take on Gandeeva, guys. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on my Gandeeva deck in the comment section below, as well as any questions. I don't think there's any changes I'm going to make to this deck. The only changes I'll make is the support that we're going to get in set 12 or 13 with the Gandeeva grade 3. Otherwise, I think this list is perfectly fine. I haven't had any issues with it. I'm very happy with my ride line. I mean, yeah, there is that very low chance he draws into this and it does suck, but otherwise, I've never had issue with this ride line whatsoever. Thank you so much for staying tuned throughout the entirety of this video, guys. I will catch you later. Peace.